There are many potential things that could be beyond this cover. Maybe one thing beyond this cover is a kitty cat. Or just maybe what is beyond this curtain is a person and a kitty cat. This extremely important decision that matters so much in the grand scheme of things can be yours to decide. Simply text to 101 101 or 101 102 and you can decide what ending happens. It will totally not skew it towards one way because that's what the writer wants. But remember, 101 101 or 101 102. Be sure to text your answer to whoever you think should win. The following material is owned by the respective rights holders. In this episode's case, the rights are held by Toei. Please support the official release in any means necessary if possible. Hello there, welcome to another Toku Ramblings. This week we're talking about alternate continuities! So, introduced midway through the series was Kamen Rider O. Then, Shiro's super OP, meant to beat the last remaining rider who was to get him his wish. Also introduced with that was his ability to more or less essentially revert time back to the earliest point of the Rider War, where things go through bar. It definitely opened up some interesting connotations of the fact that more or less what we see is not technically the first cycle of the entire show, and more or less it was decided to explore those in movie and special form. First, with Kamen Rider Ryuki episode final, which, despite its title, was not technically a post-series release that wrapped up the story, but rather was the summer movie offering an alternative to Ryuki's final overall arc. While some things more or less do carry over from series to the show, there are a lot of changes. Just the main thing is still the same. Shiro more or less tells the writers, hey, wrap this up. Or no one gets a wish. But instead of more or less Tiger and Emperor more or less being the final two writers introduced, and there being no alternative, the final two writers are more or less Kamen Rider Femme, a con by the name of Miho Kirishima, who has joined the war to revive her sister and to kill Sakura because less he killed her family, because we just keep needing to add the crimes of Asakura on this list. And if you more or less truly thought Asakura was not a monster in TV series, go read the novel, because it is it's a ride. And the other writer replaces the other ones is more or less basically a dark reflection of Ryuki. Okay, literally just a palette swap. You know how more or less in games certain characters are just a palette swap with slightly different stats to more or less make a new character. That's sort of the case here. So, episode final is split between more or less three specific things. Shinji's relationship with me, the mysterious dark writer, and more or less answers about the mirror world. The other three writers are just kind of there to an extent. Asakura more or less ends up being killed 1/3 of the way into the story by both Miho and Ryuga. Gun just kind of fizzles out. Now, Kitaoka more or less retires after becoming too tired of fighting in his illness. Though more or less, I guess he wasn't long for the world, considering the fact that if you don't feed your monsters regularly, they will kind of more or less eat you instead. I don't know, I guess maybe more or less he gave the deck to his man, serve it to more or less just kind of feed it from time to time to ensure it doesn't more or less go cuckoo. And Ren, he exists. He's there. He gets a little more because he's the secondary writer and more or less has more interactions with Shinji, but more or less his entire stint here is to more or less get bodied by Ryuga in the climax before Shinji shows up. So, yeah, this was the first major Heisei female Kamen Rider. Probably the first one in general if you didn't want to count Tackle from Stronger. Miho gives off sort of the tough girl who had to go that way because of her past, but shows that soft side. I like the suit, the overall brighter white contrast with a riders, though her visor is sort of a recolor of Knight's visor, but it matches sort of the Knight aesthetic for her. She does sort of suffer the general case of more. But she doesn't really get a big fight to her own. She handles the minor mirror monsters well, but more or less she ends up getting slammed with the ground by old gentle Ryuki shows up and more or less helps her land the killing blow, and then more or less gets bodied by Ryuki later on and just dies. That's kind of... She ends up more or less falling into a bush and dying just right then and there. Not the best way to end the first female Murder Heisei generation, but I don't know. The scenes between her and Shinji that come across the film are kind of touching. Considering this tragic what happens to her. Her UA's story kind of stays close to what it was from the initial series of more or less refusing to more or less allow the wish to happen and more or less trying to end things. It reinforces Shiro's kind of tragic nature and more or less why he's like that. His sister is basically one of the last few things he has going. And for some reason, let's hear her death more or less marks the boundaries between the real world and the mirror, while allowing Gal Heck to break loose. Then, of course, there's Ryuki, he's fine as a villain. He kind of has to play with the mask as Shinji because, yeah, the person who more or less has the same suit as Shinji is basically just the mirror world version of Shinji, who is basically his exact opposite. So we don't get really much of him, but what little we do, he is threatening, and more or less he does get what he wants done. He goes out for the kill instead of more or less just prancing around like doop-a-doop-a-doo-doo. And that final fight is really although that the ending is not great, it barely even qualifies as an ending. Shinji Rider kicks Ryuki after freeing himself from his control, but more or less there's a bigger problem. The mirror monsters are now more or less starting to attack a whole bunch of people since Yui Don is more or less causing issues. Red more or less certifies that he must win the Rider War because... Did they even mention more or less friend's girlfriend at all in this? God, I don't think they did. It's just more or less, I need to win this war because the two more or less transform into their survived forms, which was meant as a sneak preview for Shinji's form. They ride off, and that's it. That's the end of the season. They go out to fight them, and more or less the film just ends there. The film's fine. It's a decent overall film that more or less does build on the series' main themes and the like. It's just hampered by some weak characterization of villains and an ending that really is not an ending at all. It's a Bolivian army ending. The special 13 Riders, on the other hand, is, yeah, I'm not more or less gonna mince words here. It sucks. It's not great. It is pretty, honest to God, bad. And one of its biggest issues, its treatment of Shinji, which the special goes out of its way to more or less kicking the ball stomp on his head, and head and whatever ways more or less of abusing a person. Force feeding tons of food. The special starts with more or less him already bumming inside Ori journal, even though the reason for his eviction was because his time as a writer was more or less causing his paycheck to be consistently cut. What? It wasn't because more or less the job was paying poorly, it was more or less meant to be a great power comes with great responsibility thing that his writer time was more or less chewing away at his normal life. And the special also kind of treats him as an idiot. So he gets a list of writers after he becomes the second Ryuki, because the special more or less shows Shinji joining a little later into the writer war where a lot of our people have joined. And the first Ryuki had collected their list of more or less people to talk to. And who was his first visit? Asakura. Yeah, the same Asakura who is still a notable criminal, and for some reason in this continuity is treated like Hannibal Lecter with his mouth cover. You think of all the people Shinji would go to, it would not be the notorious criminal sociopath. Oh yeah, and that prison scene, let's talk about that. So first off, the police allow Shinji to come in with all of his stuff, not having him leave anything in case, he may be helping Asakura escape. Then we see Asakura chained up like he's Hannibal Lecter, being transferred. Then Kitoko shows up out of nowhere with Asakura's deck in hand. Okay, so giving this scene the biggest benefit of that, maybe this was like the only thing he brings with him. But why would he bring it along with him? You think he would want to keep it as far away from him as possible. You wanna know how dumb this is? In episode 2 after this special, we have Kitoko visiting Asakura in prison, and he doesn't bring the deck with him. So yeah, if you couldn't guess, Asakura escapes because of what Shinji has on him, breaks, and he steals back his deck and escapes into the water. I know more or less I've been complaining. I know that more or less sounds like a little bit for a singular scene, but yeah. Another odd change. They decided to change Tezuka's backstory from a fortune teller who wanted to prevent more fighting from the writer, or because the person who was originally supposed to have the deck ended up dying, to now being in a love triangle with Ren and his girlfriend because I knew he likes love triangles. That's really all there is to it. And it doesn't really matter because, not long after after this new version of Tezuka is introduced, he's immediately killed by Kamen Rider Vertag, and, yeah, let's get him. So, Vertag is Itsuru Takamizawa, a wealthy businessman who Shiro approaches for some reason to join the Rider War because I guess he wanted to be wealthier than he already was. Yeah, this is sort of in a similar vein to June of I don't know why he was approached. I guess I can use the same theory that more or less he just found the deck and more or less made the contract after Shiro approached him and more or less was just like, yeah, sure, you have it already, go ahead. But he's an already well-off CEO of a successful business company. If the business was failing and he joined the Rider War to use, that would be fine. But no, he is not only an extremely successful businessman, but an manipulator. Yeah, that's sort of my biggest problem with him. He's kind of a villain. And so I like the fact that more or less he's based off Chameleon, giving his more slimy nature and ability to throw his opponents off. But it kind of more or less it more or less kind of moves over one of the big things about why June ended up failing as a villain. So remember how more or less June ended up dying because to manipulate Asakura to make the game more exciting and more or less got killed because, spoiler, a deranged killer is not someone you can easily control. Well, Itsuro believes that Shinji is such a potential danger to the Rider War that he more or less is able to get all the other riders to kill him. And it's not just, these straight-up villain writers like, Jun and Masashi, who both kind of get a little more to do here before being unceremoniously killed. He gets all of them. Yeah, even Asakura, Fem, who is supposed to be Miho again, Odin, and a sneak preview of 2 writers who hadn't showed up in the series, Tiger and Emperor. Look, here's the thing. Alliances never work because, 1, it's kind of hard to split a reward when only one writer wins. Yes, slight alliances can work, but more or less once it gets down to it, it's an every man for himself kind of situation. And 2, writers like Asakura are too dangerous because their instability that made it impossible for alliance to exist. Yes, the series never outright states that the person in the tiger suit is more or less sought true, but here it's just there they all are, curbstorming the 2 other writers, and neither Ojo or Odin are trying to incite infighting whatsoever because it's meant to be a one shall stand, one shall rule all other. This is the big thing that makes me feel like this is just a different interpretation by the main writer Toshiki and Nero. Because this setup would never work in the main series. Because Shuichi more or less spends most of Ryuki trying to ensure that Sakura goes back behind bars, and Miho, do I need to remind people what happened in the movie and why the 2 wouldn't work together? And Odin, what is Odin doing here? Isn't he supposed to be the final boss of the whole thing here? Why is he here? Does Shiro also think Shinji's too much of a threat that he has to help Ichiro? Is he not on a timeline before his sister disappears? Isn't that the whole point of the bloody war? Or it just feels like forced drama because we need to make Ichiro seem like a legitimate threat, and it just comes off as a villain sue. Oh yeah, remember that intro more or less I gave off these weird endings? Yeah, so this special more or less had a you decide kind of ending thing where people texted what ending they wanted to truly happen. So in the end, and Ichiro ends up Ren and Ichiro mutually kill one another, and he has his deck broken. Ren more or less gives Shinji a speech to carry on the war, and Shinji subsequently transforms. As a bunch of mirror monsters show up to defend the core. Oh, right, I forgot. Early in the special, we were told that the mirror world exists because of the core and not Yui. I could complain how dumb it is that just lying out in the open and anyone could destroy it, like, say, a group from the main show who was trying to destroy the mirror world. But wait, what about Ren's wish to continue fighting? So, here are your endings. 1. Shinji decides to destroy the mirror. Decides to destroy the world. Rather more or less, seemingly the world disappears alongside the other writers, but he soon finds himself with his deck and the other writers staring at him and screaming because, well, this special hasn't cried on Shinji enough at this point. And more or less the canon, and then because it was more or less the one that won, when Shinji goes back to fight the remaining writers who all activate their final events on him just as he does, and the special ends there. They're just like Ryuki's. Shiro more or less makes a bunch of vague stuff about different timelines and more or less says to see how the true series will end, and that's the special. Both endings are not great. One's another non-ending, and the other one feels so anticlimactic it really couldn't count as an ending. This is just a ratings trap because Ryuki wasn't doing particularly too well in ratings, so more or less was done to more or less get people to see what ending was chosen. All in all, this is not great. It's overstuffed. Trying to tell an entire story. Trying to tell the entire writer war in a singular hour and a half rather than, say, a mini-series kind of thing. The main villain comes off as a Mary Sue, and Shinji comes off as more. That's completely pathetic in this entire special. It's I may have had issues with episode final, but it still felt like it contained the soul of what made Ryuki good. This takes some of the things that didn't work about Ryuki and more or less amplifies them greatly. It's probably the worst thing that Ryuki did as a whole. Oh. I hate to end on something negative, but hey, think about it this way. It's still probably not the worst thing writer has done. So that's that. As always, click up here for channel, click here for previous video, and be sure to subscribe, click the bell, and use the comments to more. But I say, yeah, it seriously helps. See ya.